A police officer assumes a man sitting quietly in a neighborhood doesn't belong there and arrests him for no reason. Moments later, the officer discovers the man isn't a suspect. He's the homeowner and a federal judge. The afternoon sun filtered through the oak trees lining Riverside Park, casting dappled shadows across the worn wooden bench where Terrence sat. He'd chosen this spot deliberately, close enough to his house to walk back in 5 minutes. Far enough to clear his head after 3 hours of reviewing case files. The park was nearly empty. A jogger passed. A woman walked her dog in the distance. Terrence closed his eyes and let the breeze touch his face. He wasn't sleeping. He was thinking. Thinking about the Fourth Amendment case on his desk. Thinking about how a routine traffic stop had escalated into a constitutional violation. Thinking about how often power got abused when no one was watching. The irony wouldn't strike him until later. Officer Derek Paulson cruised past the park in his patrol car, scanning the area with the casual authority of someone who'd worked this neighborhood for 6 years. He knew these streets, knew the residents, knew who belonged and who didn't. His eyes caught on the man sitting alone on the bench. Black male, mid-40s, athletic build, dressed casually, jeans, a plain gray hoodie, sneakers, sitting perfectly still. No phone visible, no book, just sitting. Derek's instincts prickled. People don't just sit anymore, he thought. Everyone's on their phone. Everyone's doing something. People who sit and watch, they're casing houses, looking for opportunities. He'd made good arrests on instincts like this before. Derek pulled the cruiser to the curb and stepped out. The door shut with a heavy thunk that echoed across the quiet park. Terrence heard it, but didn't open his eyes immediately. When he did, the officer was already walking toward him with that distinctive gait, chest forward, hand near the belt, eyes locked. Terrence had seen it 1,000 times, in courtrooms, on body cam footage, in depositions, the walk of someone who'd already made a decision. "Afternoon," Derek called out, stopping a few feet away. His tone was friendly enough, but his stance wasn't. Weight on his back foot, hand resting on his belt near his radio. Terrence sat up straighter. "Afternoon, officer. You live around here?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Terrence felt the familiar weight settling in his chest, that exhaustion that came from knowing exactly where this was going. He could recite the script by heart. "Yes," Terrence said calmly. 2 blocks that way." He gestured east without pointing, keeping his hands visible. "Uh-huh." Derek's eyes scanned him up and down. "You got ID on you? May I ask why you need to see it?" The question was respectful, measured, but Derek heard it as resistance. "I'm asking the questions here," Derek said, his tone hardening just slightly. "ID. Now." Terrence held his gaze for a moment, then slowly reached toward his back pocket. Derek's hand moved to his weapon, not drawing it, but touching it. "Ready?" "Slowly," Derek warned. Terrence produced his wallet with careful, deliberate movements. He extracted his driver's license and held it out. Derek took it, glanced at the address, then at Terrence, then back at the license. "This says you live on Maple Drive." "That's correct. That's a nice neighborhood, expensive houses over there." Terrence said nothing. He knew where this was heading. Derek's jaw tightened. "So what are you doing here? In the park, middle of the afternoon on a Tuesday?" "Sitting." "Sitting?" "Yes. People don't just sit, man. You watching something, waiting for someone?" Terrence felt the anger trying to rise, but pushed it down with the discipline of 20 years on the bench. "I'm clearing my head after work. I often come here." "What kind of work you do?" "I work for the federal government." It wasn't a lie, just incomplete. Derek's eyes narrowed. Something about this guy bothered him. Too calm, too measured. People who had nothing to hide usually got nervous around cops, tried to explain themselves, filled the silence. This guy just sat there, answered questions with minimal words, like he was testing Derek somehow. "Stand up," Derek ordered. Terrence didn't move immediately. "Am I being detained?" There it was again. That resistance, those magic words that made Derek's job harder. "You're being asked to cooperate with a police investigation," Derek said, his voice rising slightly. "Now stand up." Terrence stood slowly, keeping his hands visible. At 6'2", he was slightly taller than Derek, which only seemed to agitate the officer more. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "On what grounds?" Terrence kept his voice level, but his heart was pounding now. Not from fear, from fury, from the sheer indignity of it. "Suspicious activity, failure to properly identify yourself, and if you keep resisting, we can add obstruction." Derek's hand was on his cuffs now. "Turn around, last time I'm asking." Terrence turned. The metal bit into his wrists with a familiar cold click. He'd seen it happen to defendants 1,000 times. Had watched videos of wrongful arrests in chambers, had written opinions condemning exactly this kind of conduct. Now it was happening to him. "You're making a mistake," Terrence said quietly. "Yeah? We'll see about that." Derek gripped Terrence's arm and began walking him toward the patrol car. "Got plenty of burglaries in this area lately. Fits the description." "What description?" Derek didn't answer. He opened the back door of the cruiser and guided Terrence inside. Not roughly, but not gently either. The door slammed shut. Terrence sat in the back of the police car in his own neighborhood, 2 blocks from his own house, hands cuffed behind his back. Through the window, he could see the oak trees swaying gently in the breeze. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. Derek walked Terrence through the side entrance, bypassing the main lobby. A few officers glanced up from their desks, then went back to their paperwork. Just another arrest, nothing special. In the processing area, Derek removed the handcuffs and pointed Terrence toward a metal chair bolted to the floor. "Sit." Terrence sat. His wrists ached. Derek moved to the computer terminal and began typing, entering Terrence's license information into the system. Standard procedure, check for warrants, check for priors, see what came up. "You want to tell me what you were really doing in that park?" Derek asked without looking up from the screen. "I already told you." "Right, just sitting, just thinking." Derek's tone was mocking now. "Middle of the afternoon, prime time for break-ins, and you just happened to be sitting there, watching the houses." "I wasn't watching houses. I was sitting with my eyes closed." "That's what they all say." The computer made a soft chime. Derek leaned forward to read the results. No warrants, no criminal history, not even a parking ticket. Clean record. Government employee, the license indicated. Address verified, 428 Maple Drive. Derek frowned. The guy checked out technically, but something still felt off. Clean record didn't mean innocent, just meant he hadn't been caught yet. "Wait here," Derek said, walking toward the sergeant's office. Terrence sat alone in the processing area, staring at the cinder block walls painted institutional beige. He thought about his daughter's graduation next month, about the case he was supposed to review tonight, about how many phone calls this was going to take to resolve. And he thought about the hundreds, maybe thousands of people who'd sat in chairs just like this one, accused of nothing, guilty of nothing, but trapped in a system that presumed their guilt because of how they looked or where they stood or how they spoke. The weight of it pressed down on his shoulders like a physical thing. Sergeant Maria Hendricks looked up from her paperwork as Derek entered her office. "Got a suspicious person from Riverside Park," Derek said. "No record, but something's off. He was just sitting there, watching the neighborhood. Gave me attitude when I questioned him." Maria sighed. "Did he have ID?" "Yeah, clean license. Lives on Maple Drive, supposedly." "Supposedly? Did you verify the address?" "I mean, it's on the license, but what, Paulson? You arrested him for sitting in a park." Derek shifted his weight. "I use discretion based on the totality of circumstances. Recent burglaries in the area, suspicious behavior. Sitting is suspicious?" "The way he was sitting, just watching." Maria closed her eyes and pinched the bridge of her nose. She'd been a cop for 19 years and a sergeant for 5. She knew that tone in an officer's voice, the one that meant they'd made an arrest first and found justification later. "What's his name?" Derek glanced at his notes. "Terrence Washington. Works for the federal government," he said. Maria went very still. "Terrence Washington?" "Yeah, why?" She was already typing into her computer. A moment later, her face went pale. She turned the monitor toward Derek. On the screen was a professional photograph. Terrence Washington in a black robe, the seal of the United States District Court visible behind him. The caption read, "Judge Terrence Washington, Northern District, appointed 2016. The color drained from Derek's face. Tell me you did not just arrest a federal judge for sitting in a park, Maria said, her voice deadly quiet. Derek's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He didn't tell me. I asked what he did and he just said, government employee. He doesn't have to announce he's a judge, Paulson. You're supposed to have probable cause before you arrest anyone. Maria stood up, grabbing her keys. Where is he? Processing. Jesus Christ. They walked quickly back to the processing area. Terrence looked up as they entered. His expression hadn't changed, still calm, still measured, but his eyes held something else now. Recognition and disappointment. Judge Washington, Maria said, her voice carefully professional. I'm Sergeant Hendricks. I apologize for this misunderstanding. You're free to go. Derek stood frozen behind her, watching as the man he'd handcuffed and arrested stood up slowly, rubbing his wrists. Misunderstanding, Terrence repeated softly. The word tasted bitter. We'll have your belongings returned immediately, Maria continued. And I want you to know this incident will be reviewed. Terrence looked at Derek. The officer couldn't meet his eyes. What description did I fit? Terrence asked quietly. You said there were burglaries, that I fit the description. What was it? Derek said nothing. Was it my height, my clothes, or was it something else? The silence in the room was suffocating. Terrence took his wallet and keys from the property clerk. I'll expect a full report of this incident on my desk by Friday, he said. The official one you file, and the real one. He walked toward the door, then paused. You know what the irony is, Officer Paulson? I spent this morning writing an opinion on a Fourth Amendment case. Unlawful detention. Lack of reasonable suspicion. The defendant was black. The officer made assumptions. He let that hang in the air. I ruled in favor of the defendant. Terrence walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any slam. The internal investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, Derek Paulson couldn't sleep. He'd replay the arrest over and over, looking for the moment where he'd crossed the line, searching for justification that felt flimsier with each review. He'd told himself he was doing his job. Following his instincts, keeping the neighborhood safe. But late at night, in the honest darkness, he knew the truth. He'd seen a black man sitting alone and assumed criminality. Everything after that was just confirmation bias dressed up as police work. The body cam footage was damning. Not because Derek had been physically aggressive, he hadn't, but because the lack of probable cause was so obvious. A man sitting on a bench. That was it. No crime, no suspicious activity, just existing in a space where Derek thought he didn't belong. The review board's decision came down on a Thursday. Officer Derek Paulson was suspended without pay for 60 days. Mandatory retraining required. Final written warning placed in his permanent file. One more incident and termination would be immediate. Derek sat in his car in the station parking lot, reading the decision on his phone. His hands were shaking, not from anger, from shame. He thought about Judge Washington sitting in the back of his cruiser, thought about the calm dignity in his voice, even as Derek had treated him like a criminal, thought about how many other people Derek had stopped over the years with that same assumption, that same arrogance. How many of them had he been wrong about? How many hadn't been federal judges with the power to file complaints? Terrence returned to the bench in Riverside Park exactly 1 month after his arrest. Same spot, same time of day, same reason. To clear his head and think. This time, he wasn't thinking about case files. He was thinking about the young officer who'd arrested him. Paulson, 28 years old, according to the personnel file. 6 years on the force. Decent record, no previous complaints, just convinced he knew who belonged and who didn't. Terrence had seen the suspension decision, had the power to push for more if he wanted. Termination, civil lawsuit, public censure. He could make Officer Paulson's life very difficult. But he thought about the look on the officer's face when the truth came out. The recognition that he'd been wrong, the shame that followed. That was the punishment, not the suspension, not the lost pay. The knowing. The knowing that he'd become the kind of cop who sees skin color before humanity. The knowing that his instincts were corrupted by bias he probably didn't even recognize he carried. The knowing that he'd humiliated an innocent man because of assumptions he never questioned. Terrence hoped, though he wasn't optimistic, that Paulson would learn from it. That 60 days of unpaid suspension and mandatory retraining would crack something open in him. Make him examine his own prejudices. Some cops learned, some doubled down. Time would tell which kind Paulson was. A jogger passed on the path, a woman with a stroller, a teenager on a skateboard, and Terrence Washington, federal judge, sat on a park bench 2 blocks from his home with his eyes closed, thinking about justice and what it meant when the system failed and what it cost when it worked. The sun filtered through the oak trees, the breeze touched his face, and for just a moment, he let himself simply sit